Biker humiliates disabled black girl, unaware that Keanu Reeves is watching. The summer heat pressed against the windows of Sophia's apartment like an unwelcome guest. She stood motionless in front of her closet, staring at the cardboard box that had remained sealed for nearly 5 years. The faded label, written in her mother's elegant script, read simply, "Dad's Things." Sophia traced her finger along the yellowed packing tape, wondering if today would finally be the day she found the courage to open it. At 35, Sophia, Esperanza had mastered the art of compartmentalizing her life. Her small but prestigious architecture firm in downtown Providence specialized in historical renovations, allowing her to restore beauty to things long abandoned. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could rebuild crumbling Victorian mansions, but couldn't face a single box of her father's belongings. Her phone buzzed, breaking the spell. It was Keanu, her newest client and the owner of the Westerly Lighthouse, a local landmark in desperate need of restoration. "We still on for this afternoon?" his text read. "I've got some old blueprints that might help." Sophia tucked the phone away without responding and pushed the box deeper into the closet. Some things could wait another day. Outside, Providence was awakening. The morning sun glinted off the Providence River as Sophia walked briskly toward her office, coffee in hand. The city had been her home for nearly 20 years, ever since she'd fled the small coastal town of Westerly, where generations of Esperanzas had lived and died. She had never intended to return until Keanu Reeves and his lighthouse project had pulled her back into orbit. As Sophia rounded the corner to her office, she spotted her assistant, Willow, waiting on the steps. At 25, Willow possessed an energy that both exhausted and inspired Sophia. Today, Willow's bright red hair was twisted into an elaborate braid, and her arms were full of rolled-up plans. "You're late," Willow said, not looking up from her phone. "And Keanu called twice. He wants to meet at the lighthouse instead of here." Sophia felt her chest tighten. "I told him we'd review the initial plans here before heading out there." Willow shrugged. "He said something came up with the Historical Society. They found some old records in the basement." The drive to Westerly took precisely 47 minutes. Sophia had timed it during her first reluctant visit 3 weeks ago. As the city gave way to stretches of coastal highway, she could feel the weight on her chest growing heavier. Every mile closer to her hometown chipped away at the careful distance she had constructed. The lighthouse came into view as she crested the final hill, a solitary white tower perched defiantly on the rocky coastline. It had stood guardian over Westerly Bay for over 150 years, through hurricanes and harsh winters. Now, with its peeling paint and cracked foundation, it looked tired. Sophia understood the feeling. Keanu was waiting outside, his tall frame leaning against the weathered fence. At 50, his dark hair was streaked with gray and smile lines framed his eyes, evidence of a life spent outdoors. He had moved to Westerly only 2 years ago, purchasing the abandoned lighthouse with dreams of restoration. "You know, most people call before changing meeting locations," Sophia said as she slammed her car door. Keanu smiled, unfazed by her irritation. "And miss seeing you all riled up in your natural habitat? Not a chance." He gestured toward the lighthouse. "Besides, you needed to see this in person." Sophia followed him up the winding path, her practical shoes crunching against the gravel. The lighthouse had been decommissioned decades ago, but remained an important historical site, and apparently a passion project for Keanu. He unlocked the heavy wooden door, and Sophia stepped into the cool darkness of the entrance. The Historical Society was clearing out their archives, Keanu explained, leading her up the narrow spiral staircase. They found these in the basement. At the top of the lighthouse, the lantern room offered a panoramic view of the Atlantic. But Sophia's attention was drawn to the documents spread across a makeshift table, yellowed blueprints and logbooks, their edges curled with age. "They're the original plans," Keanu said, his voice reverent, "and logbooks dating back to the 1870s. Sophia pulled on a pair of cotton gloves from her bag and carefully lifted one of the blueprints. The name at the bottom of the page made her breath catch. Esperanza and Sons, Architects, 1872. "That's why I wanted you to see them here," Keanu said quietly. "Your family built this place, didn't they?" Sophia nodded, unable to speak. Her father had mentioned their family's connection to the lighthouse many times, but she had dismissed it as one of his romanticized stories, like so many others he had told during her childhood. I didn't realize until yesterday, Keanu continued. The Historical Society mentioned the Esperanza connection. They said your father used to give tours here. Sophia set the blueprint down carefully. He did, every summer, until he got sick. She moved toward the window, needing space from both the documents and Keanu's perceptive gaze. It's getting late, we should head back. Keanu didn't move. There's something else. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small brass key. They found this with the documents. It has your father's name on it. The key lay heavy in Sophia's palm, tarnished and worn, with R. Esperanza etched into its bow. A memory surfaced. Her father standing in this very room pointing out to sea, telling her that the lighthouse held secrets meant just for them. He used to bring me here, she said softly, before my mother died. He'd tell me stories about our ancestors who built it, how they put hidden messages in the stone. Hidden messages? Keanu stepped closer. Sophia tucked the key into her pocket. Just stories. He had a gift for making things seem magical. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Look, I need to get back to Providence. We can review these plans tomorrow at my office. As she drove back that evening, the key seemed to burn in her pocket. Her father had been a lighthouse keeper, a storyteller, a man whose head lived in the clouds, until cancer had brought him crashing to Earth. After her mother's death when Sophia was 12, it had been just the two of them, with Sophia becoming increasingly practical as her father retreated further into his imagination. By the time Sophia reached her apartment, darkness had fallen. The box in her closet seemed to be waiting for her, its presence somehow stronger after the day's revelations. With trembling hands, she pulled it out and set it on her bed. The tape separated with a satisfying rip, revealing neatly packed contents. Old photographs, a weathered journal, a pocket watch, and, nestled at the bottom, a small wooden box with intricate carvings of waves and stars. Sophia lifted it carefully. It was locked, with a keyhole that looked exactly the right size for the brass key in her pocket. Heart pounding, she inserted the key. It turned with a soft click. Inside lay a folded piece of paper and a smooth stone with a spiral pattern. She unfolded the paper to find a hand-drawn map of the lighthouse, with X marks at several points around the structure, and a cryptic note. The light shows the way, but the stones tell the story. Sophia stared at the map until her vision blurred. Her father's final illness had been brief and brutal, leaving no time for explanations or goodbyes. Now, 5 years later, he seemed to be reaching out from beyond, pulling her back to the place she had tried so hard to forget. She reached for her phone and called Keanu before she could change her mind. "The lighthouse," she said when he answered. "I need to see it again tonight." The moon was high when they met at the base of the lighthouse. Sophia showed Keanu the map without explanation, waiting as he studied it in the beam of his flashlight. "These marks," he said finally, "they correspond to damaged sections in the stonework. I thought they were just structural issues, but they form a pattern." He looked up at her, his expression both confused and intrigued. "What did your father know that we don't?" Sophia took the map back. "Let's find out." The first X on the map marked a stone near the base of the lighthouse. In the moonlight, Sophia could see that it was slightly different from the others, the grain running perpendicular instead of parallel. "This one's loose," Keanu said, pressing against it. With gentle pressure, the stone slid inward, revealing a small hollow behind it. Inside was a tin box, rusted but intact. Sophia's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a photograph of her father as a young man, standing proudly in front of the lighthouse. Written on the back were the words, "First day as keeper, 1978, the beginning of my watch." "There are more marks on the map," Keanu reminded her, gently. They worked their way around the lighthouse, finding similar hollows at each marked stone. Each contained a piece of her father's life. A love letter to her mother, a pressed flower from their wedding, Sophia's first baby shoe, a small watercolor painting of the lighthouse at sunset, signed by her father. The final X led them to a stone high in the wall near the entrance to the lamp room. This hollow was larger, containing a leather-bound journal. Sophia opened it to find page after page of entries, each dated and meticulously written in her father's flowing handwriting. "It's his lighthouse journal," she whispered. "He wrote about everything, the weather, ships passing by, local events." She turned more pages, then stopped suddenly. "And letters, to me." Keanu touched her arm lightly. "I'll give you some space." As he descended the stairs, Sophia sank to the floor, the journal open in her lap. The entries addressed to her began after her departure for college, when she had begun pulling away, embarrassed by what she saw as her father's impractical nature. "Dear Sophia," one read, "a storm blew in from the east today. It reminds me of your determination, how you face life head-on, never backing down. I miss your strength in this old house." Another. "The restoration committee asked about my plans for the lighthouse after I'm gone. I told them it would be in good hands, that my daughter would know what to do. Perhaps that's just an old man's wishful thinking." The entries continued through the years, chronicling her rare visits home, her growing architecture career, his declining health. The final entry was dated just days before his death. "Dear Sophia, the doctor says my time is short. There are so many things I never told you. How your mother and I dreamed of you restoring this place someday. How proud we are of the woman you've become. How I understand why you needed to leave. I've left pieces of our story throughout these walls. Perhaps someday you'll find them and understand that some foundations are too strong to crumble, no matter how long they're neglected. I love you. Always. Dad." Sophia closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Outside, the moon had dipped toward the horizon, and the first hint of dawn colored the eastern sky. She found Keanu waiting at the base of the lighthouse, respectfully distant, but present. "He knew," she said simply. "He knew I would come back. Someday." Keanu nodded, "And he prepared for it. All these years, the lighthouse has been waiting for you." Sophia looked up at the structure, seeing it through new eyes, not as an abandoned relic, but as her father's legacy, his final gift to her. "I want to do more than just restore it," she said, determination replacing grief. "I want to bring it back to life. Make it a museum, maybe. Something that tells not just its history, but the stories of the people who kept it." As the sun rose over the Atlantic, Sofia Esperanza stood in the shadow of her family's lighthouse, the weight of forgotten, things finally lifting from her shoulders. She had spent years building walls between her past and present, not realizing that some foundations are meant to connect rather than divide. The renovation would be extensive, but for the first time, Sophia felt equal to the task. With her father's journal tucked safely under her arm and Keanu's steady presence beside her, she took the first step toward reclaiming her heritage and finding her way home.